As if through a dream, I hear a man's voice. What about this one? The lieutenant is wounded in the head and arm. The woman answers. The shrapnel has damaged the skull. Whether the brain is injured, it was not possible to establish. The wounded man did not regain consciousness. Lieutenant, to the operating room immediately. The man continues to give some orders, and I, opening my eyes, trying to determine my location. It's dark. The leaves rustle quietly. The stars twinkle above my head. I'm lying on something soft. I read somewhere, thinking is living. I hurry to make sure how alive my bodily shell is. I try to bend my legs, they give in. I lift my arms one by one, the left one, bandaged, is pierced with pain. My head is full of lead under the skull, as if hammers were pounding on an anvil. Knock, 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 knock. Slanting my eyes, I see motionless figures. I hear a long groan. Noticing my exercises, a woman in a white robe and headscarf rushes to me. Are you awake, Lieutenant? She asks, leaning over. I am awake, I willingly confirm. Now you will be taken for dressing. Try not to fall asleep again, okay? Okay, I promise readily. I will not. A quarter of an hour later, I'm in surgery. The light bulb is shining brightly. I involuntarily squeeze my eyes shut. I feel how, gently lifted my head, remove a thick layer of bandages soaked with blood. The realization that it's my blood makes me sick. I can hardly remember how many liters of it in the human body. I think it's about 7 liters. How much have I lost? From weakness, I fall asleep. I woke up at dawn. I could hardly lift my head. I feel a slight dizziness. Leaning on my healthy arm, I slowly pulled my torso off the cotton mattress, kneeled down and straightened up uncertainly. Afraid of falling, timidly taking a step, a second, a third, just as cautiously I come back. A skinny girl in a white coat runs into the tent. What are you doing, wounded? She splashes her hands, carefully wrapping her arms around my waist and sternly adds, You can't get up. Nothing, sister. I try to joke. Where the Tsar went on foot, I'm able to get there on my own. The nurse gets angry, thinking my joking tone is inappropriate. Don't get up again. If you need anything, call me. What's your name? Mikatya. And immediately, having raised her snub nose covered with freckles, she corrected herself. Ekaterina Ivanovna, I'll accompany you to the evacuation hospital. They brought me a mug of strong, sweet tea with a sandwich. I don't want to eat, though I haven't had a crumb in my mouth since yesterday morning, but I drink tea with pleasure. I had no sooner finished with breakfast than Ekaterina Ivanovna came panting. Nothing Rada's wounded, she shouted. Now we'll begin loading. The first to load the bedridden, and then the... For some reason, I was included in the bedridden. 2 elderly orderlies lifted me into the back of the truck, piled with fresh hay, and put my back against the front side of the truck. Next to me sat a senior sergeant with a broken leg. A Red Army soldier, whose spine was hit by shrapnel, was left on a stretcher. The rest of the wounded were placed wherever they could. Having checked whether everyone was comfortably placed, Katya commanded in a ringing voice, Let's go. The driver drove the car carefully along the forest road. The wounded reacted to every jolt with expressions I had never heard in my 19 years. Soon the shaking stopped. The car got out on the asphalt, and the wounded, wiping their sweaty foreheads, started talking. Who knows where they are taking us? Asked a red-haired fighter, shaking his hand wrapped in a lubbock. To the Gosh hospital, I know. Said the skinny infantryman, satisfied that he was alive, that for some time there would be a quiet life without shots and bombings. To the Goo hospital, the red-haired one mimics. Clearly not to a slaughterhouse. Where is it? See, I understood from what my sister said to the driver that they were taking us to Dorogobuzh. A black-mustached sergeant with a bandaged neck enters the conversation. To Dorogobuzh. How many versts is that? Now, so many versts, I don't know. Intervenes a thin lieutenant whose bandaged chest was visible through the open collar of his uniform. But it will be 100 kilometers. At such a speed as we are now, we'll get there by lunchtime. If the fascist will let us, says the senior sergeant with a broken leg, not lowering his anxious gaze from the sky covered with light clouds. At any minute airplanes may come out and It's going to be a lightning storm, for God's sake. Look at what's going on around here. Infantry, cars, artillery wagons. Along the roadside, refugees are wandering, loaded with knots and sacks. Someone is leading a cow that is bumping behind him. Army adjusters trying to pass the cars rushing to the front, delay the transport moving to the rear, so our car often stopped. During one of the stops, we heard distant explosions. Having looked back, we see fascist bombers. They are dropping bombs on the highway. The screams of refugees who rushed scattered, the frightened roar of animals, the pitiful cries of children are stronger than the fear of airplanes. The frightened voice of a nurse brought us out of our stupor. Comrades wounded, she shouts, throwing back the rear board. Hurry to the field. Help those who cannot move. Tati grasps the handles of the stretcher, on which the wounded fighter lies wounded in the spine, trying to move them. 4 lightly wounded men help her. Others pull down from the car's senior sergeant. He wrinkles, cries out in pain. Having dismissed the lieutenant, wounded in the chest, and the mustachioed sergeant, trying to help me, I try to slide off the car myself, but I lose consciousness. I woke up in rare roadside plantations. The deafening explosions shook the ground, young trees fell. I looked at the road and was horrified. Our car turned into a smoking torch. Bombers flew away. Fighters are pouring machine gun fire on the landings where we took shelter. Death screams, groans. Fear crawls into the soul. Everyone has fear, but in battle it is suppressed by the consciousness of duty, the desire to destroy the enemy at all costs. Passive waiting relaxes. Trying not to think about myself, I help to cover the senior sergeant with a broken leg. And fascist fighters continue their black business. 8 out of 15 wounded survived. Money, let's go to the field. It's not so dangerous there. No, Katia begs. Supporting each other, the wounded sprawl across the field. How far I managed to get away from the plantings I did not notice, for my legs gave out and, exhausted, I slowly sank into the tall grass. The stupefying odours of the meadow soothed me, distracted me from what was happening. I felt isolated from the world and fell into a dream-like oblivion. I woke up to the touch of gentle fingers. Opening my eyes, I saw a worried nurse. Not allowing the thought of sleeping in such an environment, she decided that my body could not withstand a stress. When she met my surprised look, she splashed her hands with joy. Alive, thank God. From all sides, the wounded are stretching to the highway. I count 7 people, and where is the 8th? I inform Katia that one is missing. The girl sighs silently, and the redhead whisper. The sergeant was killed, the bastards. Having sat us down on the grass, Katia asks confusedly, "What should we do now, comrades?" We look at the highway. People are fussing there. They are dumping broken wagons and killed horses, burnt automobile hulks on the roadside. I suggest we take a hitchhiker. Katia quickly steps to the road. Positioning ourselves on the roadside, we watch our miniature nurse unsuccessfully trying to stop passing cars. There are few of them going east, and they're all crammed to the brim with wounded. Desperate, Katia approaches us. Mercingtoret's wounded. Move away from the road for 200 meters, in case of a new attack of fascist planes, and wait for me. I'll get to Dorogobouj and come back for you. Having thanked the girl warmly, we said goodbye. Katia managed to get into the back of one of the cars. We lay in the grass for a long time, suffering from wounds and thirst. The highway is empty. Fascist aviation forced to hide all living things. Only some cars are whizzing towards the front. Someone suggested to go to a village visible in the distance, and we, supporting each other, slowly weaving through the field. Soon we reached a country road. The sun, only occasionally obscured by clouds, takes the last of our strength. We can hardly move our legs. Suddenly we heard the roar of an engine behind us. We stop. A wheeled tractor with a trailer is crawling past us, on which the collective farmers are sitting. They run up to us, help us climb onto the trailer, saying pitifully, "My dear ones, where are you going on foot?" We explained that the fascists were bombing and shelling the highway incessantly, that the car we were driving had burned down, so we decided to go to Dorogobouj without waiting for night. Collective farm girls greedily ask about the battles near Smolensk. I draw them the general situation without going into details. In conclusion, I inform them that our troops are successfully attacking the fascists near Yartsov. "Well, thank God," the elderly collective farmer says, blessing herself with the sign of the cross. "Maybe they will stop the Antichrist, and then look and drive back in the village we were fed." The chairman of the collective farm, a broad-shouldered, bony man in his 50s, said that women and children were being evacuated to the hinterland, and it had been decided to move the cattle away from the front line. The men would protect the kolkhoz goods until the last hour, and if the fascists broke through, they would go into the forests. The chairman ordered to harness 2 wagons and said goodbye to us warmly, wishing us a speedy recovery. We entered Dorogobuzh in the evening. It reminded me something of Kalakinsk, a district centre of the Omsk region. The same one-story wooden houses under iron roofs, unpaved dusty streets, water standpipes. After much questioning, we found the hospital. As it was to be expected, the car had not come for us yet. The head of the hospital ordered to wait until dark. The delighted Katya fussed around us, guiltily said, "That's good. Well done for getting here." Doctors quickly treated our wounds, and with the onset of darkness we were taken out of town, where there was a sanitary train ready for departure. Under the measured clatter of wheels, I plunged into some nightmarish half-sleep. I dream of junkers, howling dive right at me. My head splits from pain. We are moving slowly. The train is idle on the spare tracks. It lets echelons to the front or waits for the destroyed track to be restored. On the outskirts of some town, we were unloaded from the wagons and brought by ambulances to a 1-storied district hospital buried in the greenery of densely grown linden trees. We were given a chance to wash up and change our linen. For the first time in the last month, I sleep on a soft bed with crisp white sheets. I feel inexpressible bliss. Even more beneficial is the silence, which I've gotten used to. It is disturbed only by the slamming of doors and the groans of the wounded. Doctors and nurses walk silently, talking in low voices. It was so good the headache was less bothersome. I wanted to stay longer in this paradise. However, the condition of the wound alarmed the head doctor of the hospital, a frail-looking old man in a pince-nez. He explained that the intervention of a specialist, a neurosurgeon, was necessary, and the hospital did not have such a specialist. So they decided to send me to the hospital immediately. I did not want to leave this quiet, cozy place. Dr. W.E.G. turns. I appeal to the old man. Please do not drive me out of paradise. You're an experienced doctor. My dear young man. The old man with a kind chuckle bends towards me. Wise people rightly say that a penknife in the hands of a skillful surgeon is better than a sharp scalpel in the hands of a therapist. Let's not take any chances. Let the neurosurgeon examine you. Tell me, doctor, flipping my hand on my heart, can I hope to return to the front soon? Having looked at me with a long look, the old man took off his pince-nez, carefully wiped the glasses with the hollow of his robe, and shook his head negatively. No, young man, your cranium is affected. You'll have to, as the engineers put it, go in for a major overhaul. Late in the afternoon, I and several other wounded men were loaded onto an ambulance train. On a warm August morning, I, supported by the nurse who accompanied us, cautiously descended to the platform. On the gable of the 2-story station I read, Tula. So fate brought me to the city, the name of which was associated with a recently read story by Leskov. Leaning against the window of the bus, I look with interest at the long street adjacent to the station. It seems narrow because of the streetcar tracks laid in the middle of it. On the sides stretched into the ground houses built, it seemed, in the time of Lefty. When the bus turned to a wide asphalted street, 2 and 3-storied brick buildings, also of ancient construction, we passed the monument to Vladimir Ilyich, turned right and drove into a street straight as an arrow, which, judging by the movie theatres and stores, was the main street. Later I learned that it was Kominarov Street. Almost at the end of it were the buildings of the new city hospital, which had been turned into a hospital. The wounded had to pass through the sanitary pass. The locker room was noisy. Orderlies calmly and quickly helped the wounded to undress. Men in years, accustomed to women's hands, squinting with pleasure. Young people meet women's care with embarrassment, trying to hide it behind unnatural animation. Laughter and jokes are heard. Notisha. They shout to a stubby blonde soldier with a bandaged leg, who, desperately blushing, does not allow a young nurse to pull off his pants. Don't give in, or she inexperienced something hastily torn from. What are you going to bring to the bride? To roaring laughter of those around her, the girl embarrassedly retreats and, almost crying, Mary Petrovna, the wounded man won't undress. He is kicking like a lame horse. To help hastens a tall, steeply hip woman with a kind round face and bright eyes. Stroking the fighter's dishevelled hair, she says reproachfully, Well, why are you, son, warring with the girl? She wants to help you. Now do it myself. The boy excuses himself. I'll do without a nanny. But how can you do it yourself? Objected the woman affectionately. You won't be able to, no matter how hard you try. The tire is in the way, you can't bend your leg. The woman with strong hands easily takes off the wounded man's hands and deftly pulls off his pants. The soldier frightenedly covers himself with his palms and lowers his head. Well, undressing. A mocking exclamation is heard from the neighbouring stretcher. Not paying attention to the embarrassment and jokes of the wounded, women quickly undress them and take them away or take them to a large room, where, having bandaged the bandaged parts of the body with oilcloth, carefully, like little children, up their long unwashed bodies with a washcloth, wash off the soapy yen with warm water. The soldiers gradually calm down, blissfully quack, and calmly wait for them, changed into clean underwear and robes, taken to the wards. I look at the troublesome, soaked with tension women. I feel a surge of filial tenderness. These are such caring and selfless we saw our women from the first days at the front, where they, ignoring the whistle of bullets and shrapnel, helped the wounded, carried them from the battlefield. A wise man has aptly emphasized that war is equally taxing on men and women, only the blood of some and the tears of others. I should have added that modern warfare charges women a double tribute, tears and blood. The next day I was examined by a neurosurgeon. A few days flew by unnoticed, especially since most of the time I slept. The wounded were not bored. Workers of Tula factories, schoolchildren visited us. They brought gifts, cigarettes, handkerchiefs, told us about their work. Schoolchildren sang, read poems. Especially frequent guest was the old Turner Mitrofan Vasilievich Krustalev. One day he came in great excitement. Shaking a newspaper, he solemnly announced, "Ours bombed Berlin." The news so rejoiced, as if the capture of the city had been announced. From the newspaper Communard, which we read to the holes, we learned that the fascist armies received a brutal repulse on the distant approaches to Leningrad, at the walls of Tallinn, east of Smolensk, near Kiev and Odessa. Especially happy were the reports that our troops continued to attack the enemy in the area of Yartsev. I wanted to know how things were going there, who commanded the company, whether Stolnikov or Kremenko, Petrenko, Fedya, and other soldiers who went to that fatal attack for me were alive. I asked for a sheet of blank paper and wrote letters to Stolnikov and Petrenko in the hope that some of them were still in the company. Our officers' ward is served by a nurse, a tall, statuesque, black-haired beauty Margarita. All the wounded are happy when she enters the ward, even the seriously wounded catching the affectionate smile of Rita, so we called her among ourselves, "Stop moaning, cheer up." She especially enchanted a young lieutenant, tanker Volodya Sinitsyn. His wound is heavy. The boy suffers a lot, looks haggard. His shrunken, beautiful face has acquired a waxy tint, and only light grey eyes do not give up. They reflect the liveliest interest in his comrades in misfortune, in everything that is happening around him. Waking up in the morning, he does not forget to ask his neighbours how they feel. When, because of the sharp deterioration of health, the hospital command decided to place the lieutenant in a separate room, he resolved, "No, you will not separate me from my comrades." And the head of the department, seeing how upset Sinitsyn, cancelled the order. Volodya literally comes alive at the appearance of his sister. His lifeless face is illuminated by a faint smile, overcoming shortness of breath. He tries to joke. Rita, noticing how beneficially influences her attention on Sinitsyn, going around the ward, necessarily sit down next to the bunk lieutenant, affectionately talk to him, read letters from his mother and little sister. After such meetings, the lieutenant was transformed. Having learned that before the war Rita studied at the history department of the Tula Pedagogical Institute, Volodya asked her to acquaint him with the history of Tula. "I decided to settle here after the war," he joked. One evening Rita entered the ward with a stack of finely written sheets and, approaching Sinitsyn's bed, "Well, be patient, Lieutenant. I will begin lectures on the history of my city. You asked for it yourself." We unanimously declared that we also want to be listeners. "Of course, Rita, it's interesting for everyone," said the lieutenant. Slowly walking between the bunks and trying to stay in sight of Sinitsa, Rita began her first lecture with a question. "No. Do you know who is older, Moscow or Tula?" "Moscow, of course," came the confident voices. "Not quite so," the sister smiled. "Our Tula is a whole year older than Moscow. Historians say that Tula has been known since 1146, so soon we will celebrate the 800th anniversary of our city. At first it was founded a few kilometers from the modern one, on the river Tulitsa, the right tributary of the Upa. From the Tulitsa came its name. And do you know, again asks Rita, that until 1503 Tula was the personal possession of the Khans of the Golden. In the 14th century, for example, it was owned by the wife of Khan Janabek, whose name was Theodosia. That's what it is. Then it's clear where the oriental beauty of Tula girls tries to quip neighbour Sinitsina, alluding to the swarthy skin and slightly cheekbone face of Rita, but, meeting her angry look, excuses himself. Sorry, sister, my fault. Only since 1503 Tula became part of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, continues Rita nonchalantly, and since then has become a powerful fortress on its southern borders. In 1509, the city was enclosed by an earthen rampart and oak wall, and in 1514-1521, on the left bank of the Upar was built on the left bank of the Kremlin. Rita enthusiastically tells, and Sinitsyn does not reduce the admiring look from the girl's face. We are ready to listen until night, but the hospital regime was strictly observed. Margarita announces that she will continue her story on her next duty. In the morning, a joyous event took place. A colonel from the city military enlistment office came to the ward and read out the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet on awarding Lieutenant Sinitsyn Vladimir Alexievich with the Order of Lenin. Saying goodbye, the colonel affectionately stroked Volodya's sweaty forehead and said, "Be strong. My little dove, do not succumb to the disease. Fight the wine as you fought against the Nazis." Volodya smiled. Meanwhile, his health was deteriorating. The lieutenant was melting away. At night, he breathed hoarsely, moaned in his sleep. During the day, he was taken for treatments, but they didn't help. He came back to life only when the next lecture started. Rita sat down on the chair next to him, and in the ensuing silence, her voice was clearly audible in the farthest corner of the room. The lieutenant held her hand in his and would not let go. At last the day came when Rita, after telling us how her hometown had become in the years before the war, announced that this was the end of her lectures. We thanked the girl, and Volodya pressed her hand to his breast, and a tender smile never left his bloodless lips. When the lieutenant tiredly closed his eyes, the girl tried to free her hand, but he held her back. Noticing the increasing pallor of Sinitsyn, Rita ran out in alarm to fetch the doctor. The lieutenant was taken away. We never saw him again, and did not appear, and the beautiful Rita. Her replacement sister reported that Margarita fell ill, and Volodya Sinitsyn was buried with military honours. The lieutenant's death shook us. It seemed that if the sister had prolonged her lectures, he would have found the strength to listen to them to the end. The headaches had almost ceased. The wound was healing. In the middle of August, I was transported to Esentuki. On the way, I turned 20. For the first time, the birthday, despite the fact that the date was round, passes quietly and unnoticed. I visited home in my mind, and involuntarily thought, did my mother and sister remember that today I have safely completed the second decade of life? In Esentuki, we were placed in the building of a sanatorium. After the hospital, although decent, it seemed that we got into a magnificent palace. Kondri order here were truly sanatormi, and long bake robes, many on crutches, all day wandered around the park. The chief surgeon of the hospital, as I was told, believes that the restless youth wounds close faster and bones fuse in an unprecedentedly short period of time. Therefore, doctors and nurses on the walks of the wounded look indulgently. Only after supper are the doors and windows of the first 2 floors locked tight. In this way, attempts of some zealous young men to run away on a date to familiar girls, or even to dance in the city park, are suppressed. One evening, when dinner was over and the medicines were handed out, and only the nurses on duty remained awake in the corridors, our ward was in the middle of a heated discussion of a plan to get to a party with the workers of one of the local factories. All legal avenues had been cut off. The handsome, blonde-haired and blue-eyed Lieutenant Lenya Gavrilov suggested we get out through the window. 12 sheets, according to his calculations, would be enough to get down from the 3rd floor. 4 young lieutenants from our ward take part in the sortie. 3 of them have almost healed wounds and are not particularly worried. Only Gavrilov's right leg is in plaster. I'm not taken because of a head wound. Lenya Gavrilov, after some thought, said firmly, "You can't. You can go downstairs, but you can't go up to the 3rd floor. The skull won't hold." My suggestion to ask the duty officer to excuse me was rejected as completely unrealistic. When I expressed my fear that they too would not be able to climb back through the window, the indomitable Gavrilov rolled up the sleeve of his robe and showed his swollen bicep. With such muscles, I will descend from any floor and climb back up without risk. Were we trained at the school for nothing? Gavrilov was strongly supported by other lieutenants, saying that all of them were excellent in physical training and have titles in gymnastics. We look questioningly at Senior Lieutenant Shelikov, who has grown a light mustache for solidity. He is only 7 years older than us, but to us, 20-year-old bachelors, he seems an old man, a staid family man. Gavrilov, trying to gain Shelikov's support, says, Understand, we do not want to lose, perhaps, the only chance to be with their brides at home. If all of you are pinning such serious hopes on the date, I am ready to answer to the commissar together with you. There, exclaimed Gavrilov, delighted with the unexpected support, an old man, but he understands. Anyway, boys, give me the sheets. In a few minutes, Shelikov was already checking whether the knots were securely tied, and Gavrilov, in the meantime, moved his bunk to the open window and fastened one end of the makeshift rope on it. Evenings in the south are dark, and the tightly curtained windows do not let in a single ray of light, but the tightly twisted tourniquet of white sheets should be clearly visible. Having extinguished the light and raised the camouflage curtain, Gavrilov threw the bound sheets into the inky darkness. Then, with difficulty, climbed up on the window sill, grasped the rope with both hands and, throwing the crutches over his shoulder, winked slyly. It's a long way off, he whispered and disappeared behind the window. After him, one after another, the other lieutenants came down safely. Shelikov and I picked up the rope and waited patiently for the return of the grooms. I noticed, Shelikov said, smiling, that after our lieutenants found their girlfriends, they changed a lot. They became cheerful. I think they're really in love. Who knows, maybe it'll last a lifetime. And at the front, it's easier when someone's waiting for you. The senior lieutenant took out an envelope from the nightstand and, pulling out a photograph, handed it to. Look, Lieutenant, at a piece of my heart. From the photograph looked at me a smiling pretty woman with a boy of 3-4 years old on her lap. Shelikov continued with deep tenderness. This is my wife and my son. For a long time I knew nothing about their fate. On the eve of the war we lived in Proskurov. I was at the front from the first days. From the hospital I wrote to my mother in Ulyanovsk and unexpectedly received a letter from my wife and a photo. She and her son got safely to my parents. He finished, It's a great thing, Lieutenant, to put down roots on the ground. After that you love the motherland more concretely. When they talk about the motherland, for some reason I see my relatives first of all, especially my son. I look at him and it becomes easier on my soul. If I die, life will continue in him. The Shelikov family will live on. Thinking about our own things, we dozed off unnoticeably. I was awakened by a rather weighty stone, which, fortunately, fell on my chest. Leaning over the windowsill and hearing a low whistle below, we quickly lowered the sheets. Shelikov seated himself on the end of the bunk to which they were tied, and I prepared to receive the returning comrades. Here a grinning Gavrilov appeared out of the darkness. Grasping the windowsill, he jokingly Receive, Q may, guests from all the Volosts. Once in the room, he took the crutches off his neck and pulled the sheet tourniquet. Soon, grunting, Savinov, soaked with excessive effort, climbed up. The sheets tightened again, but for some reason no one appeared. Sakabit Ian Grice shouted angrily downstairs. Well, are you sleeping there? I can't get up, came Tunov's guilty voice. Go back down, let Nilov try, and you rest, ordered Gavrilov. What do I, the groom? Nilov covered a much greater distance than his predecessor, but could not reach the window, exhausted. Weaklings. Gavrilov lamented, not knowing what to do. That's what it means to have a 3 in physical training. Go downstairs, let Tinov try again. A new attempt by Tinov, followed by Nilov, ended in failure. Go, you unfortunates, to the front door, shouted Gavrilov and waddled out of the room. We silently followed him. We went down to the first floor, woke up the nurse on duty and asked to open the front door. Why? The nurse was surprised. Nay, 2 of our comrades fell out of the window. Gavrilov suddenly blurted out, What do you mean they fell out? The nurse looked at us, frightened. Crashed. No, calm down, Shelikov intervened. Our comrades are all right. They happen to be on the street after lights out and can't get into the ward. Have pity on the poor fellows. So the bewildered, uncomprehending duty officer grabs the keys and hurries to the front doors. When she opens them, she sees 2 unharmed lieutenants. indignantly splashing her hands, the woman shouting, "What on earth is going on? All decent people are asleep and you're out and about. Wait a minute. I'll report everything to the Comrade Commissar tomorrow. What are the names?" "Dear sister," says Lenya Gavrilov affectionately, hopping on crutches behind the furious woman on duty. "Why do you need their names?" "Well, the guys were out in the fresh air for a while, so fresh air won't hurt them." "Names," did not give up, pushing the embarrassed lieutenants away from the door with her powerful chest. With a doomed look, the perpetrators of the commotion admitted their defeat. Lieutenant Nilov from the 28th Ward. Lieutenant Tunov from the same. Gavrilov long shamed his associates for poor physical training, and in conclusion contemptuously seen. Unhappy weaklings. If you don't know how to do it, don't do it. The next day a huge scandal broke out. The commissar of the hospital called all of us to himself and, looking closely at our embarrassed faces, said angrily, addressing she, "Well, you, as the senior in age and rank, should report on the emergency." The senior lieutenant hesitated. Then Gavrilov, decisively stepping forward, asked, "Comrade Commissar, allow me to report everything in detail." "Report, Lieutenant." The senior political officer looked at Gavrilov's hunchbacked, tanned face with interest. "So, Comrade Commissar," clearing his throat, Gavrilov began, "UA delegation from one enterprise visited us, the Women's Brigade of Klavdia Vedonikova. They brought gifts, told us about their work, and we told about ourselves. In general, we got acquainted. Every free minute they visited us. In short, we fell in love, Comrade Commissar. I don't know about them." Gavrilov nodded at his comrades, "but as soon as I get out of the hospital, I'm getting married." The lieutenants amicably supported this statement, confirming that they too had the most serious intentions. "You are dodging aside," the senior political officer said dryly. "Report why your comrades were outside the hospital." "Sir Comrade Commissar, I'm coming to that," Lenya Gavrilov continued calmly. "The brigade in which my fiancée Dasha works was given a bonus for hard work. We decided to congratulate the girls." "We," report specifically. "Me and Lieutenant Savanov, Nilov and Tunov." Gavrilov throws a guilty look at the others, as if justifying nothing they say. "Cannot help. You cannot lie." "And why does the duty officer reports only about Nilov and Tunov?" wondered the commissar. "Why were you and Savinov in the ward and your comrades on the street?" "Weak physical training failed," Gavrilov answered with undisguised annoyance, taking a deep breath. "I'll never forget my former teacher, Lieutenant Kolod. He drove us to the 7th sweat on the tourniquet, bars, through the horse, on the rope, and always instructed. Remember, cadets, the one who successfully saddled all these equipment can count on success in any case requiring strength and agility. My comrades convincingly confirmed yesterday the justice of our commander's words. They only had to climb the rope to the 3rd floor, but the task was out of their hands. And you, it turns out, can do it," the commissar asked incredulously, looking at the plastered leg of the lieutenant. "I managed to do it," Gavrilov confirmed modestly. "Well, comrade lieutenants," the commissar rises from his chair and slowly walks past the frozen disturbers of the police. "Thank fate that none of you were not injured during your operation to establish cultural ties. For now, I will limit myself to a warning. But if this happens again, the strictest measures will be taken. You should be in therapy, not dating. Everyone, please remember this warning." After that incident, our room was strictly monitored. So a few days later, I said goodbye to my comrades. I was sent to Sochi for treatment. The city amazed me not only with its lush subtropical vegetation, but also with the most magnificent palaces and sanatoriums that housed the hospitals. It was September, and Sochi did not feel any signs of fall. Caring care, and most importantly, the marvelous nature and invigorating air accelerated recovery. From the wound on my arm was only a memory, and my headaches became less and less noticeable. I took long walks and felt quite healthy. At the next examination, an elderly and very experienced Dr. Nikodim Stepanovich encouragingly said, "Well, young man, you can take off the bandage. Let the wind blow your head." "So I can count on that. Now you will send me to the commission?" In a week, not sooner." Nikodim Stepanovich pats me on the shoulder. "A week," I rejoiced. "Just a week, and then you can ask to go to the front." Optimism is characteristic of youth. Imagination often pictured how exhausted fascist troops, turn back under the blows of the Red Army. Newspaper reports, especially the news about the crushing defeat of the fascist troops near Yelnya, also pleased me. But I was even more encouraged by the report of the commissar of the hospital on the situation at the fronts and on the most important events in the country and in international relations. The commissar made such reports on a weekly basis. When I came to the club for the first time, an amazing picture opened before me. The auditorium was full of people, even on the front stage stretchers with the wounded who could not move independently. They lay quietly, without raising their heads. Here on the podium appeared a tall, ascetic-looking senior political officer, and the wounded moved. The eyes of all were directed at the podium. "Merci, comrades," exclaimed the senior political officer. His voice is sharp, creaky. Starting the war against the Soviet Union, the mad Führer and his generals boastfully trumpeted to the whole world that their troops would be in Moscow in 2 or 3 weeks. They expected to complete their brigandage against the Soviet country as lightning fast as the military campaigns in Western Europe. After a pause, the commissar asked, addressing the hall, "What is the date today?" "September 16th, he echoed from the hall. So not 2 or 3, but 11 weeks have already flashed by, and the fascist monsters can't see Moscow even through a telescope. The applause exploded the silence that reigned in the hall and prevented the commissar from speaking for a long time. However, it did not upset him. He stood calmly, stretched out in all his considerable height, and smiled. At last he raised his hand and, having waited for silence, continued. For more than 2 months, the fascist armies cannot move a step in the area of Smolensk, and under Yelnya found a grave many Hitler divisions. The fascist beast has broken its teeth at Leningrad, Kiev, Odessa. In short, the plan of lightning war is cracking at all seams. In the central direction, the fascist army has long since gone on the defensive, and now the Red Army is wearing down the enemy, and in the northwest and southwest directions, Sir Commissar draws the situation in the country, and I am carried away in dreams to the front, to my comrades in arms, and together with them drive the fascists from their native land. Naturally, I wanted not to be late for the turning point in the course of the war. So, having intensified physical exertion, I was looking forward to the day of discharge from the hospital. Suddenly, there was a rumor that Kiev was left behind. It was difficult for us, middle-level commanders who had little understanding of operational art, to understand why our troops, who had so successfully repulsed enemy attacks on the outskirts of Kiev, now voluntarily surrendered the city. What happened? With this question, we turned to the commissar. He said that he would try to answer it at 20 o'clock in the club. By the appointed time, the auditorium was full. On the stage hung a large map of the Soviet Union, on which flags marked the line of the Soviet-German front. Rapidly coming out from behind the scenes, the commissar approached the map. "Comrades," he said excitedly, "in any war, zigzags are possible. In such a gigantic battle which is now waged by our country, sudden changes are inevitable. Our people and their army have enough strength to achieve victory, but on the way to victory there may be any surprises, such as, for example, the abandonment of the capital of Ukraine. So decided the Supreme Command, decided because further retention of the Kiev bulge, deeply embedded in the territory occupied by the fascist armies, threatened to encircle our troops. In addition, the heroic defense of Kiev had already yielded its fruits. It helped the armies fighting in the central direction to stop the enemy. Defenders of Kiev diverted tank and motorized divisions, and thus forced the fascist command to abandon further attempts to attack Moscow. Listening to the commissar, I admired his ability to give a profound analysis of events on the scanty newspaper reports. The complication of the situation in the south prompted many commanders, who felt themselves capable of holding a weapon, to visit the commissar with a report of discharge from the hospital. I went. Such visits forced the commissar to gather all convalescents and announce that reports on early discharge from the hospital will not be considered. The decision on this issue will be made by the medical commission on the proposal of the attending physician. "We are all military," said the commissar, "not so no amateurishness. And considering that discharge from the hospital largely depends on myself, I spend all my free time in the air, in long walks through the wonderful Sochi parks. They amazed me with exotic vegetation. I had never seen such trees, bushes, and flowers before. So as in the hospital park, I met a very handsome old man who was walking slowly along the alleys and noting something in his notebook. Approaching him, I timidly asked, Grandfather, do you know what a giant tree with a conical crown and light-coloured needles is called? We have many coniferous trees in Siberia, but there are no such trees. The old man put the notebook in the outer pocket of his light sailcloth jacket and, running his hand over his grey beard, smiled good-naturedly, making the numerous creases that furrowed his face deeper. This tree, young man, is called the false yew tree, he replied. It is native to North America. This specimen is far from being a giant. It is probably the tallest tree in the world. It reaches 100 meters, and the trunk thickness can exceed the 5-meter mark. We got to talking. The old man called himself Trofim Nikolaevich, asked me my name, where I fought, under what circumstances I was wounded. He listened to my answers with genuine interest, often saying sorrowfully, poor boys. Trofim Nikolaevich told me about his anxiety for his grandchildren, who were my age. Both of them are at the front, one in the infantry, the other in the sapper units. Troubled by the memories, Trofim Nikolaevich put his hand on my shoulder and said affectionately, "When you met me, you called me grandfather. So call me grandfather from now on. I am pleased I involuntarily remember my boys." Wishing me a speedy recovery, he was walking down the alley but suddenly stopped. "Grandson, wait." I came closer. "Tomorrow I have a trip to a large farm, which is engaged in growing planting material for the parks of the Black Sea coast. There is a magnificent arboretum. If you want, you're welcome to come with me." With pleasure, I rejoiced. But will I be allowed to leave the hospital? I'll take care of that. Tomorrow at 11 o'clock wait for me at the entrance. The next day, during the morning rounds, attending physician said that the head of the hospital allows me to go to the arboretum. Half an hour before the appointed time, I impatiently walked by the gate. Noticing from afar the gaunt figure of Trofim Nikolaevich, I hurried to meet him. On the way to the arboretum, Trofim Nikolaevich inquires about my well-being, asks me if my wound is bothering me. With a smile, I assure him that I am ready for battle, and from one day to the next I am waiting for a summons to the commission. Youth, sighs the old man. How you are all in a hurry. Here and my grandchildren, still years not drafted, and they ran to the military recruitment office on June 22nd, and got what they want. They're fighting. We quickly reached the Mezimta River in a semi-truck, on the bank of which the fields of the Garden of Southern Cultures were spread out. Even before the revolution, Trofim Nikolaevich started his activities here under the guidance of the outstanding horticulturist Scriver. All this magnificent park, the old man proudly circles around him with a wide gesture, yew is laid some 30 years ago. Now it occupies 16.5 hectares. The flora of almost all subtropics is represented here, and suggesting, "You, grandson, take a walk. I'll make an agreement at the office to write us planting material and familiarize you with the park." Left alone, with interest I look at the unseen trees and shrubs. Soon Trofim Nikolaevich returned. "Here, look at the most typical representatives of the subtropics," he said, pointing to palm trees and bananas. "And here is the pampas grass. In its homeland, South America, it reaches 2.5 meters in height. It can be used to make paper and various wicker products. It's an araucaria, lives up to 2,000 years. I've heard that oaks live for hundreds of years, but 1,000? Unbelievable." No wonder, Trofim Nikolaevich objected. There are long-lived trees, too. Here, for example, is a swamp Mexican cypress. The tree is powerful, with an extremely wide crown and delicate needles, and lives up to 4,000 years. Noticing that I am looking at the unnaturally shaped shrubs, Trofim Nikolaevich smiles good-natured. The square and spherical shape of the shrubs is the work of human hands. Park workers regularly trim the boxwood. We stopped in the shade of mighty, unfamiliar to me trees. Here is the most widespread representative of our Caucasian forest, the eastern beech, the old man explained. It occupies more than a quarter of the entire forest area in the Caucasus and is of great national economic importance. Its wood is beautiful, strong, and flexible. Beech nuts contain oil used in the food industry. When I saw a young bamboo grove, I couldn't resist. Wow! The finished fishing rods are standing. See those? Bamboos are tree-like grasses. In America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, they reach a height of 60 meters with a trunk diameter of up to 40 centimeters. It is impossible for one person to lift such a rod. Some bamboos grow amazingly fast, a meter per day. It is said that once the Chinese used this property to tortuously execute their enemies. They put the doomed person on a bamboo shoot. It's frightening to imagine what the unfortunate man felt. Or maybe the writers are making it up. A few hours flew by like a blink of an eye. When Trofim Nikolaevich noticed that it was beginning to get dark, he caught up and took me to the office, where a hospital car was waiting for us. The visit to the Arboretum left an indelible impression. A few days later, I was summoned to the commission. I felt perfectly healthy and tried to convince the doctors of this. To my joy, they agreed with me. It took 2 more days for the paperwork. And finally, the long-awaited day came. It was sunny and warm, as it is in Sochi in the last days of September. Having put on a cotton gymnosphere and pants, yawl boots, pilot's cap, and having taken a spacious soldier's overcoat, together with other commanders, I went to the bus, which would take us to the station. Having found out that we still have at least half an hour before departure, I hurried to say goodbye to Trofim Nikolaevich. With difficulty, I found him in a far corner of the park. When he sees me in my camping gear, he splashes his hands with grief. Already? Oh my God, how fast everything is. I showed you so little. Never mind, thank you for your attention. When we come back with a victory, I'll definitely come to visit. Don't forget your promise. I want to see you alive and well. Goodbye. Raising on tiptoes, Trofim Nikolaevich kisses me 3 times according to the Russian custom. Then, pulling me aside, he scrutinizes my face and suddenly baptizes me. Well, grandson, God bless you and do not fail. Excited by the fatherly caress of a stranger to me, I hug the old man and, turning sharply, ran to the bus. After the war, I came on vacation in Sochi and, throwing things, hurried to the sanatorium, where the hospital was located. But I did not find the old man alive. As soon as I settled down on the seat, the bus started. 15 minutes later, we were already standing on the platform of the station and waiting for the train to Armavir, where was then the headquarters of the North Caucasus military district. In the personnel department, my personal file was not there. It, apparently, remained in the 19th Army. I got a new one. In my autobiography, I described my life path. Having carefully studied my personal file, the personnel major announced, "Go to the village Slavianskaya, Lieutenant, in the 65th Reserve Rifle Brigade. You will command a training rifle company." Why to the Reserve Brigade? I could not contain my grief. I'd like to go to the front. I have combat experience. That's why you will go to the Reserve Brigade. Ooh, said the major strictly. It prepares personnel for the front, and who will do it better than the commanders who have been in battle. In general, remember, Lieutenant, especially the commander, must be ready at any moment to go where ordered. Get it through your head. Noticing that I was deeply upset, the major softened. You, Lieutenant, probably won't be in the reserve unit for long. The situation is such that at any moment you can be at the front. Don't worry, you'll get enough of it. In the village of Slavianskaya, at the brigade headquarters, we, the commanders who arrived from the hospitals, were received by the brigade commander, a thin, medium-sized elderly colonel. He asked each of us what front he had fought on, and in what position, then took his time walking along the line, looked at us with a scrutinizing gaze. "My comrade commanders," he said, "despite the fact that in the summer campaign, the German troops did not solve the problems facing them and suffered huge losses in manpower and equipment, the situation remains difficult. Since the beginning of October in the Moscow direction, the Nazis launched a general offensive by the forces of Army Group Center. 2 powerful tank rollers are now advancing north and south of Vyazma, and the third through Oral to Tula. There is a direct threat to the capital of our motherland, Moscow. In an extremely difficult situation are the defenders of Leningrad. The city is blocked from the land. Supply is possible only on Lake Ladoga. The troops of the Southwestern Front are steadfastly holding the defense along the River Sil, but the breakthrough of the defense on the Bryansk Front creates a threat of a deep bypass and exit of the fascist troops to the rear of the Southwestern Front. Things are not better on the Southern Front. Thus, comrade commanders, events are unfolding, the outcome of which will decide the fate of the entire fall-winter campaign. And in many respects it will depend on how quickly the active army will receive the prepared reserves. Remember this in your work. Do not spare neither strength nor time. Captain Nikolenko's battalion, in which I was to command a rifle company, was located at an inactive cotton purifying plant. Nikolenko was my third combatant for the past 5 months of the war, so I involuntarily compared him with previous commanders. Most of all, he reminded me of Captain Tonkonozhenko, and not only in appearance and formation, but also in the ability to clearly and concisely formulate thoughts and give orders. However, Nikolenko had a trait that markedly distinguished him from the pedantic Tonkonozhenko, a deep sense of humor. One day Nikolenko came to my class. He was in a carefully pressed uniform and shiny boots. I involuntarily embarrassed, looking at my wrinkled uniform and long-time not-cleaned boots. Nikolenko did not make any remarks to me, but as he was leaving, he said quietly, "You have a bad petty officer, Lieutenant. He doesn't care about his commander at all. Order him to get an iron and a shoe brush." And he added, smiling, "or no girl will want to look at you." I was not very much hurt by his words, because I thought that in war appearance was not the main thing. But I wanted to look like my commander. He was a well-rounded commander, equally strong in solving tactical problems, in physical exercises, and in shooting from all types of small arms. Studying the personnel of the company, the organization of training captured me so that I did not notice how the month flew by. Immediately after the November holiday, the whole staff of the training battalion, headed by Captain Nikolenko, was called to the brigade headquarters and announced the order to include the battalion in the 633rd Rifle Regiment of the 157th Rifle Division of the Transcaucasian Front. I was especially pleased that I was sent to the division as the head of a training company, with the commanders and soldiers of which I had already become thoroughly acquainted. In mid-November, the 633rd Regiment was transferred to Tuapse, and from there the battalions were dispersed along the Black Sea coast. The regiment was assigned to protect the coast from Novorossiysk-Adler and the preparation of defensive structures. The 3rd Rifle Battalion got a section from Novorossiysk to Tuapse. Our 8th Company, Tuapse and the coast 6 to 8 kilometers north and south of the city. Unusual scale of the task stunned me. When I glued all the sheets received, the map had to spread out on the floor. Each platoon got almost 5 kilometers of coastline. In the center of the site was the city of Tuapse, a major port and industrial center. Of course, the fascist command will seek first to seize it. We need to make the best decision to protect it, and experience is lacking. It is impossible to be strong everywhere. It is necessary to concentrate forces in decisive points. Therefore, the primary task is to find such points. We study the area first on the map, then on the ground. First of all, we try to look at the coast through the eyes of the enemy, planning a landing from the sea. And at once those places where it is difficult to approach by dinghies and boats, even in quiet time, were eliminated. The main efforts were concentrated on the protection and defense of the port and piers. Together with the company's political officer, Mitrofan Vasilievich Abramenko, we searched the whole coast. Returning to the evening of the 3rd day from the last reconnaissance, Abramenko with difficulty crawled off his horse and embarrassedly said, "Well, Alexander Terentievich, I am definitely not fit for cavalry. One more such gallop and you'll have to ask for a new political officer." Spreading his legs wide, he waddled toward the one-story house where you were staying. After such a jolt, all my insides changed places. When I looked at the political officer, I realized what tortures he had suffered during our trips, and I sincerely wondered how he, a city dweller who had never ridden, managed not to fall off his horse. I asked the orderly to bring lunch. Mitrofan Vasilievich is flipping through a notebook at the window. Sit down, Mitrofan Vasilievich, I suggest. No, the politruk smiles embarrassedly. I'd rather stand. I feel as if I had been cruelly flogged and sprinkled with salt. Zail Semenchenko, a short, dense orderly, slipped silently through the door, put 2 soldiers' kettles filled with something liquid on the table, put thick slices of stale bread and, sniffing his cold nose, invited, "Sit down, fellow commanders, have a little snack, Theodosia." When he regained his composure, he carefully pulled out of his pocket a half-liter bottle 1/3 full. "Comrade Petty Officer sent me the People's Commissar's rations." Abramenko grinned. "But it would have become a habit and a Terentievich. Then what will you do in peace day? After all, your wife won't put a cup to dinner every day." "On what occasion are you drinking, comrades?" suddenly came from the threshold. Turning to the voice, we saw Captain Nikolayenko in the doorway. His blue eyes glittered mockingly from under the visor of the cap. "Join us, Comrade Combat." Mitrofan Vasilevich stomped cordially around Nikolayenko. "Just dinner is coming up. Take a sample from our company boiler." "Thank you." Combat came to the table, sat down on a roughly chipped stool. Mitrofan Vasilevich brought an old chair with a soft seat, which the hostess was extremely dear. "Sit here, Comrade Combat," he offered, putting the chair near Nikolayenko. "It is more comfortable and does not creak. And you, Comrade Politruk, why are you standing there?" Mitrofan Vasilevich carefully lowered himself on the stool, but immediately jumped up, writhing in pain. "I can't, Comrade Captain. I made a chop out of my scrotum today, chasing the commander on a horse." With difficulty holding back a smile, the commander shook his head reproachfully. "Why don't you, Comrade Lieutenant, help the political officer to master the correct riding posture? Teach him, my friend, it will come in handy at the front." The captain pushed back his chair. "You, Comrade Politruk, have to sit on a soft chair, but we are used to it." I handed the commander a spoon. Nikolayenko pulled out his own from behind his shin. "I always have my personal weapon with me." After swallowing a few spoonfuls of millet soup, he remarked, "If you add fresh potatoes to this Gaber soup, it will taste better," advised the petty officer. "You can get potatoes in the nearest collective farm. There is an agreement." When we emptied the kettles, the commander asked to report how we think to organize the protection of the coast. I detailed our plan: the main forces of the company to concentrate in the Tuaps area and along the coast north and south of the city to create observation posts and shooting positions. They will be occupied by infantrymen from the reserve when we receive reports of the enemy's approach. Having approved our plan, the commander decided to drive a semi-truck through the company's section. He carefully studied the places where we planned to equip strongholds, and, parting, promised to send 2 trucks so that we could maneuver the reserve. How to speed up the receipt of reports from the observation posts. The collective farm promised to provide horses for each platoon, but it was still too slow. And then I remembered the way Cossack sentries let us know of the enemy's approach. Signal fires. What if we use smoke bombs? The number of lighted sabres would mean the approximate number of troops. "If we don't get smoke bombs," said Mitrofan Vasilevich, "let's gather dried wood on the shore and look for old tires. I'll take care of this personally." In the evening, a radio operator arrived to the company together with the cars unexpectedly. Combat sent him to maintain communication between the battalion and the team. Quickly flashing days of hard work. We are preparing the routes of advance platoons to possible landing sites, set up surveillance and signaling systems, build strongholds on the landing sites. In addition to strengthening the coast, we are engaged in firearms training. Every other day we conduct tactical exercises on repulsion of the landing force and live firing. Such help in the preparation and conduct of classes is provided by my deputy, Lieutenant Stupidson. At our first meeting in Tuapses, he impressed me with his appearance. Everything on him was with a needle. Apparently, an excellent tailor had a hand in his uniform. Stupitson's clean-shaven, well-groomed face was noticeably different from our weathered and peeling faces. With undisguised pride, Stupitson told us that after graduating from military school he had served for more than a year in the administrative and economic apparatus of the headquarters of the military district. Fortunately, the good firearms training received by the lieutenant at the school had not yet had time to weather out. We entrusted him with gun firing and conducting live firing. In mid-December, among the soldiers went talk that soon in Sevastopol we will give the Krauts a light. It is difficult to explain the reason for the appearance of such rumors. So perhaps they were generated by the desire to help the defenders of Sevastopol. On December 17, the Nazis launched their second general attack on the city. About 10 enemy divisions made furious attempts to break through to Sevastopol. In the platoons eagerly awaited Mitrofan Vasilevich. Each story about the unwavering steadfastness of Sevastopol residents he tried to illustrate with examples. After he told about the immortal feat of 7 sailors Komsomol, who for 3 days repulsed the frantic attacks of the Nazis, sprinkled reports with requests to send to Sevastopol. Even I had a dream that the battalion at dawn landed in the port of Sevastopol. In short, no one had any doubt that such an opportunity arose when Captain Nikolayenko unexpectedly came to us on December 22. Having learned that I was on the construction of engineering structures, the commander rushed to the port. Without listening to my report, Nikolayenko squinted his eyes and pointed at the capital structure that we were building on the pier. You by no means decided to sit here until the end of the war. We are ready to leave for Sevastopol even today. I objected with resentment. Soldiers and commanders have been flooding me with reports. That's good, laughed the commander. You can immediately gather, and strictly added, at 21000 company must be ready to board the ship, fully armed and with all the property. The task is clear. Clear, readily responded, and I thought, and the dream is in hand. Exactly at the appointed time, the company in full combat readiness lined up in the port. We went out into the open sea. The storm had played out for real, and a 6-point wave rocked the ship like a nutshell. I felt bad. Be strong, Lieutenant, said a sailor who ran past with a grin. They say that the famous Admiral Nelson was seasick all his life. Only the stoutest of the men clung to the railing, while the rest of the men and commanders of our waterproof company, as it was derisively dubbed, sprawled in the corners and moaned quietly. Yes, it was not easy for infantry sea baptism. The final destination of the voyage was known only to me and the political officer. Therefore, when at dawn in the distance showed the outlines of the city, someone asked in surprise, "Brothers, isn't it Sevastopol?" Well said. I heard a mocking voice. It's a long way to Sevastopol. Say, brother, called out a sailor who appeared on the deck. Is this Sevastopol? Novorossiysk. Then it's a different story. The soldier rejoiced. Now we have a hope to set foot on the motherland. Although the wave was still tossing the ship from all corners and shelters, the Red Army men reached the sides. They looked longingly and hopefully at the shore. I could feel how they wanted to feel the solid ground under their feet as soon as possible. The ship could not unmoor for a long time. As soon as we managed to fix the gangway, the Red Army men rushed ashore like pirates boarding an enemy ship. Lieutenant Veniamin Soloviev, Adjutant Senior, in other words, the Chief of Staff of the battalion, was waiting for us in the port. Having heard the report on the safe completion of the transition, he informed us that the company would be housed in the school building, which was located in the area of cement factories. Soon we were already mastering our new accommodation. The thought occupies me most of all. Why we brought to Novorossiysk with such haste? It depends on it, how firmly we should settle down here. In the evening everything becomes clearer. We, commanders and political workers, were summoned to a meeting at the regimental headquarters, noisily sit down in a spacious room of a 2-story brick building. Mutual greetings are heard. Mitrofan Vasilevich and I look curiously at the faces of commanders. With many of them we met in the reserve rifle brigade. The door opened. Through the threshold, jingling spurs, stepped Regimental Commander Major Georgy Ivanovich Andreev. Behind him, Battalion Commissar Trofimov and the Chief of Staff of the regiment, Captain Mansirev. They say that Mansirev served in the old army and rose to staff captain, and in the Civil War he commanded a battalion. He was called back into the army with the outbreak of war. Next to him, Andreev looked like a boy. When there was silence in the room, Andreev made the usual movement on his face, as if to wipe off his fatigue, and began to familiarize us with the upcoming task. We must participate in the sea landing. The time and area of the landing would be announced, as Andreev stated, in due time. Then Nachtabar Mansirev familiarized us with the daily schedule. We would have to work 14 hours a day and more at night. When all the questions were discussed, the battalion commissar Trofimov rose leisurely. Tilting his head as if trying to remember something, he was silent for a minute, then looked around the gathering. Natchenty comrades, commanders. The commissar speaks softly, but his well-pitched voice is clearly audible even in the farthest corner. Given the instructions of the Commander and Chief of Staff, is easy to understand that the regiment will have an extremely difficult task. In the sea landing at us, no one has not participated, although most of the soldiers and commanders have already been to sea, drank, as they say, salt water. Consequently, it is necessary to persistently prepare for landing. We must remember day and night that the 157th Infantry Division, which joined our regiment, has already learned the joy of the first victories over the Nazi invaders in September on the outskirts of Odessa. It carried its banners with honor through the brutal battles in the Crimea. So let us spare no effort to earn the right to be proud of the division's military deeds, as its veterans are proud of them. After the meeting, Captain Nikolayenko ordered to submit to him by 3 o'clock in the morning for approval of company schedules of classes. On the way to the company, we wonder, where are we to In the end, we agreed that still send us to help the heroic defenders of Sevastopol. The morning in all platoons began training. We teach the fighters rapid attacks on fortified strongholds, teach them the tactics of battle in the city. Politruk, with the help of local authorities, got some fishing boats, and we conducted a landing on the shore in a fairly powerful rolling wave. It was not without incidents. One boat turned, and the men found themselves in icy water. But with each disembarkation, the fear of the threatening sea element decreased and confidence grew that soon we will be in Sevastopol. The soldiers hurry to share this news with their relatives, impatiently waiting for news from home. Letters. How much joy and grief they bring to the fighters, especially those whose families remained on the territory temporarily occupied by the enemy. How they envy the fighters, to whom the letter carrier handed the cherished letter, and how they toss and turn from side to side and do not sleep, despite the fatigue, and sigh heavily and pitifully call someone, if you manage to forget in a fleeting dream. It is not difficult to imagine with what excitement I opened the long-awaited letter from my native Steklanka. I read with greed the words written by my little sister Masha, and suddenly, as if a needle pierces my heart, Mikhail died near Moscow. I look at the lines blurred with tears and do not believe my eyes. My sister wrote that my father, having read the funeral notice, saddled his horse and rode off to the district. He came back late in the evening, told my mother to gather food for the road. 2 weeks later we received a letter from him, in which he said that he was going to the front. There was no more news from him. When I finished reading the letter, my face must have shown such suffering that Mitrofan Vasilievich exclaimed, calling me by name for the first time. "What's the matter, Alexander?" Silently he held out the letter. Having quickly run through it, Abramenko sighed heavily. "You, courage. Alexander?" The death of my brother and the absence of news from my father had thrown me off balance. I sat up late into the night, staring at the class schedule, hardly understanding the meaning of what was written. My childhood years are inextricably linked with my brother Michael. In the village, when adults were busy in the field from morning till late in the evening, an older brother or sister was a babysitter for the little ones. Mikhail dragged me with him everywhere, to play with piers and fishing, to mushrooms and even to steal peas in other people's fields. Once, having attacked a mushroom place, he got so carried away that he forgot where he had left me. In despair, he ran through the forest. The more he got excited, the farther he got away from me, so he did not hear my pitiful calls. He ran home with a roar and told me what had happened. Father, mother, all relatives and neighbors rushed to search for him. It was not until morning that they came upon me sleeping sweetly on the thick, soft moss. From that time on, to my great dismay, my parents began to take me and my little sister with them to the fields. During my school years, I was again an inseparable companion of Michael, who tried to develop in me courage and agility. He never stood up for me, and wiping my broken nose on the back of my shirt, he used to say, "It's nothing, for a beaten man they give two unbeaten. You don't make a fuss, know how to stand up for yourself." I loved my brother selflessly. Knowing his brave and resolute character, I was looking forward to hearing about his exploits at the front, but he was killed by a machine gun burst in the first battle. "Hey, Misha, I repeated mentally, perhaps you were going for broke, and in war one reckless courage will not take. You need accurate growth, stamina, and good combat training." Lieutenant Soloviev, a joker and mocker, with whom we had become very good friends lately, noisily entered the room. "Hello, Pyakota Kebabui," mockingly called the platoon commanders. "You're too lazy to work, but you want to eat?" Surprised that those present frowned and did not react to his joke, he sat down and looked at me carefully. "What's wrong with you, Alexander? You have no face on you. How am I going to take you to the nursing staff for a date? They'll chase you away." "Let's go, Veniamin." Mitrofan Vasilievich lightly touched the lieutenant's shoulder. "Don't disturb the commander," and, pushing him out the door, angrily mutters, "Grief only paints the cancer, and the commander has grief, and do not pester him with jokes." An hour later, Veniamin quietly slipped into the room, cautiously sat down next to me and put an aluminum flask on the table. "I'm sorry, my friend, I didn't know." Without a reply, he collected tin mugs from the windowsill and, splashing a little from the flask into them, offered, Alexander, let's commemorate your brother and all those who fell in battle. Join us, friends." He invited Mitrofan Vasilievich and Lieutenant Afanasy Ukraintsev, The commander of the 1st Platoon, and raising the mug, said heartily, "May they rest in peace. Eternal memory to those who fell in the fights for the flag." I gratefully looked at my comrades and brushed away an involuntary tear. The next day the company learned about my grief. Commanders and soldiers tried to show me maximum attention. Especially surprised me rude and grumpy Sergeant Botchkov. During a smoke break he came up to me and, awkwardly stomping, comrade, he. I also got a letter from my sister. She writes that the Germans shot my grandmother right on the threshold of the house for not letting her steal a cow, and the little boy who was next to her was wounded. You bastards! He shook his mighty fist and big tears rolled down his weathered cheeks. They'll get everything for everything, just to get there. We won't have long to wait, Comrade Botchkov. Soon it will be our turn. We'll pay for everything. Now go and study. Yes, study. Botchkov called out with unusual diligence for him. On the morning of December 28, the weather changed dramatically. The storm that had been raging for several days began to subside. There were no scheduled classes, and the battalion after breakfast formation went to the city bath. I'm rushing after, but the way I'm blocked by Veniamin Solovyev. With a mysterious wink, he whispers conspiratorial. You don't know, my friend, what outstanding person was born today. Noticing my bewilderment, the lieutenant laughs merrily. On December 28, 1921, Veniamin Vikentyevich Solovyov, your humble servant, was born. On hearing that I was in a hurry to go to the bath, Veniamin protested. The bath won't run away. Now we'll go to our dining room. The manager promised to allocate a bottle of Riesling from her stock. Let's hurry, or she'll change her mind. A wheelbarrow rushes towards us. In it, whipping the horse with belt reins, stands the commissar of the regiment Trofimov. Noticing us, he pulled the reins so tightly that the horse rose up with a candle. We rushed to the tank. Where is the commissar? Impatiently shouted the commissar. In the headquarters, answered Solovyev, panting from the fast running. Raise the battalion on alert. Battalion commanders and company commanders immediately arrive at regimental headquarters and, bucking his horse, rushed away. What happened? Shouted after Solovyev. Without an answer, he ran to the battalion headquarters, and I hurried after the company that had left. The regiment, raised on the alert, follows the marching order to the port, and in our 8th Company 15 Red Army men and sergeants are absent. 5 natives of Novorossiysk and, with the political officer early in the morning, let them go to visit their relatives. The rest 2 hours ago went to search for them at once to 2 addresses, to their parents and to their wives. Would they be able to return in time? The commander of the regiment warned. If they didn't make it in time, I and the political officer would be court-martialed. The berths of Novorossiysk port are full of ships of various purposes. We were stopped near a huge multi-cannon ship. This is the cruiser Red Caucasus. Major Andreev, Battalion Commissar Trofimov, and Captain Mansirev, accompanied by a naval officer, appeared on the gangway. A command sounded. Battalion commanders and commissars, commanders and political workers of individual units, to the regimental commander. Commanders and political officers surrounded Major Andreev. While they were conferring, Mitrofan Vasilievich and I were anxiously watching. Would the stragglers appear? The battalion commander and commissar returned. Nikolayenko announced the order of landing. It was the turn of our company, and the stragglers are not seen. Mitrofan Vasilievich, stepping to the gangway of the cruiser, unhappily dropped. No tribunal us, comrade commander, not to pass. I look at the waves, crashing against the high wall of the pier. The storm is less, but white lambs on the crests of snowy furrows trace the surface of the sea. Battalion finished landing. We are waiting for the command to raise the gangway. We stand at the board, clinging to the rails, and look at the city. Abramenko wrinkles his cool forehead and keeps his eyes on the port gate. He still hopes for a miracle, and I mentally see the fighters in the arms of their loved ones. They don't know if they'll ever see each other again. The thought of happiness which I gave to the fighters somehow eases the burden of heavy responsibility for the decision. The guys will win theirs back, I think. The war is just heating up. The rays of the sun broke through the blue clouds, illuminated the buildings on the shore. Suddenly a group of Red Army soldiers appeared at the entrance to the port. I became hot. I recognized Sergeant Botkov in front. The Politruk, recognizing his own, pushes me in the shoulder and holds out a pack of Carlsberg. Let's smoke, Alexander Terentievich. Help yourself. And after waiting until my fingers, unbent from the cold, had grasped the thick cigarette, he remarked, "The last you, we'll have to switch to Makorka." Meanwhile, the Red Army soldiers ran up and, exhausted, hung on the railing of the gangway. The whole company rushed to their aid. Gently supporting their tired comrades, the soldiers hurried to drag them onto the ship. Having made sure that everyone has arrived, I hurry to Captain Nikolayenko. Having heard my report, he sighs with relief. "Your luck, Lieutenant. We shouldn't have let them go home." Meanwhile, the gangway was removed, the anchor was raised, and the cruiser, shuddering mighty hull, smoothly moved away from the wall of the pier. I looked at my watch. 18 hours and 40 minutes. Going out of the water area of the port, the ships rearranged themselves. In the center, like two ducks surrounded by ducklings, are cruisers Red Caucasus and Red Crimea. They are accompanied by small ships of various combat purposes. Mitrofan Vasilievich, who had not the slightest idea about the combat purpose of the ships, politely calls an elderly sailor with the patches of petty officer of the first article. "Listen, comrade, I can't understand why such little things," he pointed at the skittish boats, "protect such a giant as our ship, which has so many formidable guns. You see, comrade," the sailor explains judiciously, "more ships are built in a certain order, which we sailors call a marching order. Each ship has its own place and its own specific task. A cruiser is designed to protect other ships and land troops. In our marching order, cruisers Red Caucasus and Red Crimea are the main strike force, so it is against them will be directed the main blow of the enemy. Aviation, ships and submarines. From aviation, cruiser will protect itself with anti-aircraft artillery against ships. It has a powerful artillery, but it is difficult to fight with submarines. Here help small, fast ships. When landing, they will ensure the landing of the landing force of the first throw." "Wow," surprised Politruk. "Such harmless bugs, and without them we will not succeed." Battalion commissar came up. He suggested to assemble the company in a cubicle where a loudspeaker is installed. They'll broadcast an important message. There were so many people in the cubicle that we couldn't breathe. "Sir, comrade soldiers and commanders," the voice of Major Andreev sounded in the loudspeaker. "Make fulfilling the order, our advanced detachment at dawn on December 29 landing in the city of Theodosia. Specific tasks unit commanders will receive before landing. And now listen to the address of the Military Council of the 44th Army. Comrades, the combat order of the Supreme Command of the Red Army to take the Crimea came from the loudspeaker. In a severe and formidable for our fatherland hour, you are going to the mortal battle with the sworn enemy. Bravely go forward to the enemy, knowing no fear in the struggle, despising death in the name of victory. Let's fulfill the order of the motherland. Let's defeat the German bandits. Let's give Crimea." And reproducer silenced, and the soldiers did not disperse, waiting for something. The silence was broken by the excited voice of Mitrofan Vasilievich. "Tried to base, we were given a combat task to set foot on the shore of our native Crimea and clear it of fascist invaders. This is an order of the motherland, and we will fulfill it by all means. In an hour will be held company party and komsomol meetings. The vendor is one issue, the vanguard role of communists and komsomol members in the upcoming battles." The last words of the political commander were drowned in a lively buzz. Fighters hotly discussed the upcoming landing in Theodosia. Red Army man Klimuk, a steep-shouldered guy of about 20 years old, sliding his cap to the back of his head and running his fingers through his thick, uncombed hair, exclaimed in surprise, "Mother of God, I never thought or guessed that I would go to Aunt Pariska's house for Christmas. She has been living in Theodosia for 20 years, since she married a sailor. She'll probably be happy if I come to visit. In every letter she says, 'Come and come.'" "I think you won't have time to visit," Ulovin said mockingly. "And the Krauts will give you such hot hospitality that you will forget your aunt's address." "I won't forget," Klimuk waved away. "I have a memory not like your mother's son. Now come." And they said that we were going to Sevastopol, surprised machine gunner Shalenkov. "Little what people say," objected to him his partner Bondarev, cheekbone stern man, possessing an extraordinary strength, and with a fatherly tenderness guarding his young comrade. "See, commanders know what they are doing. The Germans, you see, are waiting for us in Sevastopol, and we will go to Theodosia and come to us from the rear." Sayavivimsia mockingly stretched out a neighbor machine gunner's elderly Red Army pahin. My Kuma went to visit us, but she left her honor there. First get to the shore and take Theodosia, then and reason. Because you see how the sea is furious? Nothing. The main thing is not to drift. Mandarev grinned. Courage of the city takes courage. We'll take Theodosia too, if ordered. Discussing the news, the Red Army men left the cockpit. My political officer and I went up on deck. The sea had played out again. Even the heaviest cruiser is tossing. A lot of people got seasick. We can hardly get through the icy deck to the commander. Ice crust-covered boards and ship superstructures. You can move, only holding on tightly to something. At Nikolayenko gathered commanders of companies and individual units. Combat approached the map, pinned to the planking of the cabin, and circling with a pencil Theodosia, briefly reporter. So after landing, our regiment clears the fascists from the central and northeastern parts of the city. Then from the south attacks Mount Lysaea. 716th Regiment is advancing along the highway to Serigol Station, captures it, and moves to Lysaea from the east. 251st Highland Regiment clears the southwestern part of the city, seizes Cape Ilia and the heights adjacent to the city from the northwest down. The battalion commissar reminded that the success of the operation is decided by people, so it is necessary that each Red Army soldier penetrated the importance of the task and that the feat of each of them immediately become known to the entire battalion. Make more use of handwritten leaflets, instructs the commissar. Do not forget about the wounded. None of them should not be left without help. We leave the meeting silent and focused. We go up on deck. We are deafened by desperate cries. It turns out that the destroyer behind us has hit a mine. It is sinking before our eyes, and with him go into the abyss of the sea several hundred paratroopers. The ships closest to the destroyer are rushing to help, but to save the drowning in such a wave is an extremely difficult task. At the thought that in the place of the unfortunate crew could be us, became uncomfortable. Everyone is depressed. There is nothing more terrible and bitter than to witness the death of comrades and not be able to help them. I wanted to get to the shore as soon as possible. I went down to the cockpit. Here platoon agitators read a loud memo to a soldier going to the landing. With Mitrofan Vasilievich, party leader Vekov and Komsomol company Grisha, Avdiv discussed the order of the party and Komsomol meetings. Mitrofan Vasilievich suddenly proposed to hold an open party and Komsomol meeting. Now, comrades, time is running out, he said, but the agenda is common. We liked the proposal, and the battalion commissar did not object. The meeting was opened by Vekov. The muffled voice betrayed the excitement of the party leader. Giving the floor to Mitrofan Vasilievich, he listens intensely. So for the heroic defenders of Sevastopol, says the Politruk, me is a mortal threat. Our sacred duty, to come to their aid. Therefore the regiment, together with other units, must land in Theodosia and hit the fascists so that they forgot about Sevastopol. Communists and Komsomol members have one advantage over other soldiers, the right to be ahead. Remember that, comrades? Komsomol members, Grisha Avdiv said with youthful passion, will not lag behind the communists in battle. Komsomol members supported the speech of their leader with a friendly approving roar. Almost all communists and Komsomol members spoke, and everyone swore to honorably fulfill their military duty. When Partuk Vekov proposed to make a decision, Botkov stood up, straightened up in all his considerable height and indignantly shouted, "What can't we, non-party members, say?" "Why can't we, Comrade Butchkov?" Mitrofan Vasilievich was surprised. "Speak." Comrades," boomed Botchkov excitedly. "No, we non-partisans are not burning with a desire to fulfill our duty. We also want to beat the sworn fascists so that they left a wet spot. My heart aches when I remember that on the doorstep of my house, the Nazis shot my wife and wounded my little boy. So let me get to the fascists. With these hands, I'm ready to strangle them, the sons of bitches. With these hands," repeated Botchkov, shaking his huge fists. No, he's right. Sergeant Malishko's trumpet voice broke through the noise. "We've all had a lot of grief, since communists have such a privilege. To go ahead, take me into the party?" "Me too," booms Botchkov. "I want to go into battle as a communist too." And me. The excited soldiers jumped up from their seats. What to do? The bewildered party leader turns to Mitrofan Vasilievich. "We can't just accept it like that right away." "Why can't we?" A broad, satisfied smile lit up Mitrofan Vasilievich's swarthy, tired face. Let everyone who wants to go into battle as a communist write applications now. After the battle, we will fulfill the necessary formalities. In the meantime, we'll consider everyone conditionally accepted. Agreed, comrades communists? Agreed. Agreed. Unanimously supported the political commander party members. Young fighters who were not members of the Komsomol, inspired by the united impulse of their elders, said that they also want to go into battle as Komsomol members. For the rest of my life, I will remember this extraordinary meeting, excitedly said Mitrofan Vasilievich. Merci, so will I. But will the political department approve the decision? Will approve, will definitely approve. I'm sure the men will prove their right to be communists in battle. The P officer Sankin proudly reported that all the men were provided with double ammunition and 3 hand grenades. He was terribly offended when instead of praise I expressed dissatisfaction with the work done. The petty officer, of course, got more ammunition than necessary to start the battle, but I thought that the company should be provided at least for the next 24 hours. It was required, as it seemed to me, the special conditions of the battle in the city. Unfortunately, Combat Nikolayenko did not support me. Having heard my request, he indignantly exclaimed, "What are you, Lieutenant, in camels want to turn the soldiers?" Then I ordered the petty officer immediately after the landing to organize the collection of captured grenades, automatic rifles, and ammunition for them. I had not forgotten how they helped us in the battles in Smolensk. So when I told Mitrofan Vasilievich about it, he grinned and said, "Battle experience is the best textbook. It teaches not to repeat mistakes." Busy preparing the company to disembark and to fight in the city, I forgot about the horned mines waiting for the ship, about the rocking and seasickness. But when at the 4th hour of the night all the business was finished, my attention was again focused on the raging elements. To distract myself, I decided to find out how we would disembark. "Things on the situation," vaguely answered the commander. "Maybe on the boats changed to the boats, and maybe the cruiser will be able to approach the pier." Such an answer did not satisfy me. I decided to talk to an experienced sailor, but the commanders, busy with business, were not inclined to enter into conversation. Finally, grabbing the coat of a petty officer of the first article, I shouted, trying to block the noise of the sea, "Is Theodosia coming soon, brother?" Soon," replied the petty officer, and, breaking free, ran along the deck, putting his feet wide open. No matter how much I looked, I could not see the outline of the shore. It's impossible to stand on the swaying deck. I must admit that I, a landman, was a little afraid to look at the surging wave. It was hard to believe that it would not cover the ship. Almost clinging to the deck with my hands, I dragged myself to Mitrofan Vasilievich. "Why is the sea so furious?" Mitrofan Vasilievich tries to cover his anxiety with a joke, but the anxious notes give him away. "Don't you think our journey is taking too long? After all, in such darkness, it's easy to go off course." "What are the instruments for?" "You get lost, knock on a window in the nearest village, and they'll tell you exactly where to go." "Theodosia," shouted someone on deck. Where?" came the voices. "I can't see a damn thing. We jumped out of hiding." "Where's Theodosia, comrade?" "There are 2 lights," showed the sailor. I look closely and see 2 flickering lights. "Why do you think it's Theodosia?" "The submarines are pointing us in the direction of the harbour entrance." The lights are getting closer. Finally, through binoculars, I saw the vague outline of the city. "Oh, I wish we had a lighthouse," said the sailor watching on the port side. "It is somewhere here to the left of the entrance to the port. Back in June, we oriented ourselves by it when we entered Theodosia." Suddenly, a bright beam shone from the shore. "Look," exclaimed Mitrofan Vasilievich. "The lighthouse is lit up." "It's not a lighthouse, it's to the right. Someone is signalling us from the cliff." "What dashing fellows?" "It's from the command posts." "Begin landing." The flares on the shore took off with the same methodicality. "So, the captain lieutenant stated with satisfaction. So far everything is going smoothly. The Crochet US since it seems have not found us." Suddenly the deck beneath us jumped, as if the ship hit an obstacle. A bright flash split the horizon for a moment. The city appeared like a stage set. "No, Holy Mother," an elderly infantryman crossed himself fearfully. "The ship exploded." "You infantry?" condescendingly grinned a stocky sailor. It was bang on the krauts from the main caliber. Gun salvos of Red Caucasus and Red Crimea drown out the shots from other ships. We can guess about them only by flashes. And the city seemed to diet. Not a single shot back. Apparently, the Germans, celebrating Christmas, did not expect an attack, did not think that the Soviet troops dare to land in such a storm. The artillery cannonade lasted for 10 minutes. Under its cover, fast boats rushed to the shore. The boat, which broke into the port first, landed a group of sailors at the Theodosia lighthouse, and only then the Germans came to their senses. The air was streaked with bright traces of machine gun bursts. The first gunshots rang out, and water tornadoes swirled around the ships. By the bursts of grenades and machine gun bursts, it is not difficult to imagine how fierce the battle was on the shore. Still, I wanted to cling to the solid ground as soon as possible. I told Mitrofan Vasilievich about it. An infantryman is like the mythical Antus. If you tear him away from Mother Earth, he will lose confidence in himself. No, the sea is not our element, he said, shrugging his shoulders shakily. It took the Marines 8 minutes, which seemed like hours, to capture the Grand Breakwater and the piers. The battle was still going on when, on a signal from the Red Caucasus, a destroyer flew into the port. Shahumian went to Tula, proudly noted the petty officer of the second article. I served on it for 2 years. It's a wonderful ship, and the commander is a dashing Captain Lieutenant Fedorov. Look what they're doing, you bastards, he suddenly shouted, pointing at the water tornadoes that rose around the destroyer approaching the pier. One after another, 2 more destroyers and a minesweeper burst into the port. In the most difficult conditions, under continuous fire, they landed Marines. From the Red Crimea, standing near the entrance to the port, launched several capacious barges. Maneuvering between the water tornadoes, they rushed to the piers, and to the side of the cruiser stands Minesweeper, who had time to land the first paratroopers. One of the enemy shells explodes on his deck. Watching the development of events in the port, we did not notice how the experienced commander of our cruiser, Captain Second Rank, Gushchin, brought the ship to the outer wall of the big breakwater. However, the stopped cruiser became a convenient target for enemy artillery. A deafening explosion suddenly sounded in the bow of the ship. The blast wave swept many paratroopers into the raging waves. Sailors and Red Army soldiers who came to their aid throwing drowning life preservers. The second explosion is heard. We continue to catch people and do not realize that we are literally sitting on a powder keg. After the war, when A.M. Gushchin and I remembered this episode, he told me that the shell exploded in the gun turret of the main caliber. The explosion ignited one of the powder charges which there was no one to extinguish. Everyone in the tower died. Another minute, and the flames would have reached the other charges, then to the ammunition cellar. Fortunately, at this critical moment, sailors Pushkarev and Pilipko penetrated into the tower. They cleared the way for the emergency crew and prevented the catastrophe. Having made sure that Red Caucasus could not unmoor and throw the gangway to the breakwater, the commanders of patrol boats, having landed the Marines, brought their ships to the cruiser. We were ready to shout hurrah when our company was ordered to disembark first. The Red Army men were leaving the ship with apparent pleasure. Without prodding, they grabbed the thick rope and, closing their eyes, rowed down it to the deck of the boat, dancing on the wave, staring at their tense faces and convulsively twitching fingers. I remembered the September night, the young lieutenants descending down the rope from the sheets on the 3rd floor, and the cheerful voice of Lieutenant Gavrilov sounded in my ears. Those who failed in physical training do not go on a date. I involuntarily laughed. What's wrong with you, Alexander Terentievich? I remembered a funny story. Well, if you can think of more funny stories, everything's all right, because I thought, is it that guy? Mitrofan Vasilievich expressively twirled his index finger at his temple. I decided to go with the 1st platoon. I waved goodbye to Mitrofan Vasilievich and, slightly holding the rope with my feet, I slid down rapidly. Go with the 3rd platoon. I shouted to the political officer. I'll meet you on the shore. The overloaded boat, tumbling from wave to wave, rushes to the shore. I look back at the ship and shudder. There, where our boat was just standing, a giant water tornado surged up. If we had been a little longer, we would have found ourselves at the bottom. I noticed that the closer we got to the shore, the less frequent the mine ruptures. I wanted to shout, "Here comes the land, comrades," as there was a deafening whistle, and on the right side a column of water rushed up and collapsed on the deck. All those on deck were pelted from head to toe with an icy shower. Spitting out the salty water, I shouted, "Go," and jumped from the boat which had run into the shore. I was hit by a rolling wave, but I managed to stay on my feet. I ran ashore and immediately went back to fetch the fighter who had been knocked down by the wave, and more units are landing from the boats. I shout to Ukrensev, pointing towards the embankment, from where a fierce firefight is coming to you. Malishko's forged boots rumble behind me. Having concealed the platoon behind the brick fence of the harbour, we jump out with Ukrensev to the square and plop down behind a pile of stones next to the Marines. "Why don't you attack?" I ask the Marine closest to me. He silently points to the corpses of his comrades and to the windows of the third floor, from where machine guns are firing. Having examined the area, I realize that the most dangerous are the first 20 to 30 meters. They are intensively shot by machine guns. It is necessary to make the machine gunners to be silent at least for 15-20 seconds, then the fighters will have time to skip the deadly zone. I order Ukrensev to deploy the platoon a little to the left of the Marines. The platoon is ready to attack. Ukrensev reported. "Who is your most accurate machine gunner?" I asked, although I knew in advance that the lieutenant would name Grishchenko. At the test firing, he shot sniper. As I expected, Ukrensev called Grishchenko. I ordered him to accurately calculate the sight to the right fascist machine gun, and I tried on the window from which we are continuously poured lead rain. With binoculars, I can clearly see the face of the fascist behind the machine gun. I point Ukrensev at the squat buildings behind the open gate. As soon as we open fire on the machine guns, you and your platoon at sprinting speed cross the square, burst into the courtyard and clear the buildings of fascists. Exactly 10 minutes later, Grishchenko and I whipped long bursts at the windows. The fire was not only unexpected for the fascists, but also accurate. The machine guns were silenced, Ukrainians and soldiers cheering themselves with shouts of hurrah, the indiscriminate rifle fire did them no harm. The Marines came up behind the men of the 1st Platoon. They were supported by the 633rd Regiment, which had just landed. A firefight broke out to our left. I remembered that at the same time with our regiment landed units of the 251st Mountain Rifle Regiment of Colonel Magalashvili, and realized that they began to clear the western part of Theodosia from the fascists. Having shot one disc each, Grishchenko and I catch up with the platoon. Fighters smoked out the fascists, who were huddled in a 2-story stone building. Judging by the rare shots, the fascists are few. Thirdly, they don't let us skip to the next street. And second, other units will fall under their fire. I send Sergeant Malishko with a group to help the sailors who are clearing a multi-story building. Such our task was made easier by the fact that there were no locals in the houses. We did not yet know that the fascists did not tolerate the Russian spirit and therefore drove the inhabitants out of the houses where they settled themselves. First, we smoked out the fascists from a squat building, whose windows overlooked the square, then surrounded a 2-story house in the courtyard. It is unlikely that we would have been able to do without losses if it had not been for Lieutenant Ukrensev, who was surprisingly accurate in throwing grenades. He took advantage of the fact that we were concentrating fire on the windows, turned from behind the corner, and threw 2 grenades one after the other through the windows, and the third one knocked out the boarded door. As soon as the explosions sounded, the soldiers rushed into the house. In 5 minutes everything was quiet. Loud shouts of hurrah made us jump outside. The yard was filled with soldiers of our battalion, ahead of whom I saw a worried Mitrofan Vasilievich. "Alive," he exclaimed joyfully, "and we thought that the Kraus had killed you here." I had no time to ask whether the landing of the advanced detachment was successful, as I was called to the battalion commander. Captain Nikolayenko was sitting in some storage room, looking at a plan of the city. I reported my arrival. With surprise looking at my uncovered head, Nikolayenko, "Where is your hat?" "Oh, see." I sadly waved my hand. Telegin. So Imperayanti called Nikolayenko. "Yes, Comrade Combat," replied the commander of the supply platoon, pushing forward. "Hat to Lieutenant Altunen." "Yes." Telegin pulled off his new hat and handed it to me. Noticing my indecision, he calmed me down. "I'll get it now, Comrade Lieutenant." "Well, now you can set a combat task. It won't fly out of your head. The hat will get in the way." Nikolayenko joked and laughed merrily at his witticism. "Listen to the combat order. The enemy, having turned strong stone buildings into strongholds, is trying to delay the advance of the advanced detachment. The task of our 3rd Battalion is to capture the central part of the city and advance to the northeastern outskirts, destroying strongholds along the way. The nearest task, to seize the border church, brickyard. The next, you, to advance on Mount La. On the right comes the 1st Battalion, on the left the 2nd. Having indicated the dividing lines between our battalion and neighbours, Nikolaenko is silent for a minute, staring at the plan of the city, then alternately calls to himself the commanders and red-dotted out the direction of movement of each company. We wrote down the names of the streets on which to attack, and relied mainly on Mount Lysaea, which was visible from anywhere in the city. "The task is clear, comrades commanders?" asked the commander. "Nee, clear," in one voice we replied. "You do it." I hurried to the company. I was met by Lieutenant Stupitsin and reported that the company's attempt to advance along the main street leading from the city market to the northeast had failed. The enemy had entrenched itself in the adjacent houses and was firing so densely that no mouse could get through. I ordered to call platoon commanders, and waiting for them I think over the plan of further actions. Suddenly Petty Officer Sankin appears and lays out a stack of new woolen underwear in front of me. "What kind of junk?" I ask strictly. Sankin, touching the black brush of his moustache, nonchalantly explains. "We found this at the Kraut's warehouse. Change your underwear, comrade commander. You're not wearing any dry thread." I grab a set of underwear and hide in the nearest entranceway. With pleasure I pull on myself dry woolen underwear, and Sankin, who came in next, holds out a second set. "The upper one will become wet. You'll throw it off and it will be warmer." Silently I follow the advice, with difficulty having pulled on wet uniform over underwear and having changed wet chrome boots for German ones with wide shanks, in which it is convenient to place automatic rifle magazines. I immediately felt how warmth envelops my chilled body. "As everybody was given out, who bathed?" I asked. No, stretched out Sankin. "I didn't have time." Now so, was up and involuntarily compared, Okremenko would have taken care of the soldiers long ago. Immediately clarify with the platoon commanders which of the soldiers and sergeants have been in the water and give them 2 sets of underwear. That everyone gets 2 sets of underwear, snakely warned. Search all the houses, but get some. Sankin, throwing a curt, is rushed out of the entrance, but I, still angry, called him. "Where are the captured grenades, ammunition and weapons?" There was nothing to collect. All the machine guns and grenades found on the dead men had been snatched up at once.